This video is made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.
It may have started as a humble RPG, but Pokémon has since transformed into a global phenomenon. You may not have first encountered Pokémon through the video games, but there's no denying their importance in getting children and adults alike addicted to catching them all. With over 24 entries, including different versions, the mainline Pokémon video games deserve recognition for keeping us entertained for 2+ decades. While Sword and Shield are at the top of everyone's mind, let's take an extended look at the games that came before, including our personal experiences with them, and the major and minor changes that have kept the series fun and fresh. Pokeball Go! 2.5 years after their original Japanese release, Pokémon Red and Blue finally came to North America on September 28, 1998. And for many, this was the start of a beautiful relationship between the now over 800 Pocket Monsters and their enthusiastic trainers. Whether you're wearing comfy shorts or something else entirely, you've almost certainly come across some form of Pokémon, be it the anime, the toys, the movies, or the games themselves. But it all started with a pair of Game Boy games that would be among the highest selling titles on Nintendo's first handheld console. Pokémon Red and Blue put players in the shoes of a Pokémon trainer and tasked them with becoming a Pokémon master. While the main story of the games took you through a series of gym battles against Pokémon of different types, and onto the Elite Four and the Pokémon Champion, who turns out to be the rival you've been competing with throughout the adventure, the real magic of the Pokémon games is the objective-turned-slogan, "Gotta catch 'em all." Whenever you catch or evolve a new Pokémon, your encyclopedia-like Pokédex is updated with details about the creature and your overall tally goes up. By obtaining all 150 Pokémon in the game, you're congratulated by Professor Oak and can receive a diploma from Celadon City, all of which is fairly anticlimactic, but serves to underscore that perhaps this was about the journey all along. At the heart of these first games, and really every subsequent generation, is the importance of making a choice. Do you go with Blue over Red? Do you choose Bulbasaur over Squirtle? Obviously not, Squirtle's the GOAT, but even before you start playing the game, you've already made and are thinking about choices that will impact your experience. And for the younger demographic targeted by these games, this was, and continues to be, a recipe for success. Having different Pokémon in the two games may be frustrating to some, but it facilitated that need to trade with people to complete your collection, and at the heart of the Pokémon experience is sharing your team and your accomplishments with fellow trainers. Just over a year after the release of Blue and Red, Pokémon Yellow version, Special Pikachu Edition, came to North America on October 19, 1999, because of course it did. Pikachu was more than just a mascot, it was an icon, and remains so to this day. Yellow featured a number of small changes to previous versions as well. First, there was no initial choice of Pokémon, as you had to start with Pikachu. But this particular creature would follow you around on the overworld, and you could interact with it to see how happy it was. You would also encounter Jessie and James from Team Rocket. Gym leaders would have different Pokémon, and some of the sprite work was updated. In 2004, all territories would receive the enhanced remakes Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green, with September 7 being the North American release date. Given that these two games released after Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, they adopted the gameplay changes of Gen 3, which we'll discuss shortly. One notable difference between the original games and these Game Boy Advance remakes is the inclusion of the Sevii Islands, which function as post-game content but can be partially accessed after defeating Blaine. The most recent trip to the Kanto region came in the form of Pokémon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, which brought the mainline series into HD and onto consoles for the first time on November 16, 2018, with a global release. While the setting and story essentially follow that of Pokémon Yellow, HMs are absent, and the breeding that was in Fire Red and Leaf Green is also gone. However, the most significant departure from all previous Pokémon games is in how Pokémon are encountered and captured. In areas where random Pokémon battles would normally occur, in the Let's Go games, Pokémon are actually visible in the overworld and can be encountered simply by walking into them. This begins a catching minigame involving berries and Pokeballs, which is quite similar to that of Pokémon Go. In addition, motion controls had to be used when playing the Switch in docked mode, but they were optional in handheld mode. Co-op play with a partner was another new feature. Mega Evolutions, a mechanic originating in Pokémon X and Y, and Alolan forms from Pokémon Sun and Moon also made their way into the Let's Go games. I remember going to Toys R Us the night that Pokémon Red and Blue launched and picking up one of each, blue for me and red for my younger brother. I don't even remember having 2 Game Boys in the house, but we must have, since I couldn't put the game down for months. I was only partially interested in catching them all. My real test was trying to have the strongest team and then taking on all possible challengers at school. To my disappointment, there wasn't really much competition for someone with a Mewtwo, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres all at level 100. That didn't stop me from poring over the official Pokémon Nintendo strategy guide and its imprecise listings of each Pokémon's overall stats. Every new generation brought me a revitalized sense of vigor for the series, but third games like Yellow and Crystal never really appealed to me. On the eve of a brand new Pokémon generation and the first true sequel to appear on a console, I'm excited to experience the Galar region and discover the secrets it holds. But nothing will compare to those first hours exploring Kanto by a cheap nightlight while my parents thought I was sound asleep.
With the runaway success of the first generation of Pokémon games, it's hard to believe that the hype was already underway for their follow-ups before the originals launched internationally. Originally known as Pocket Monsters 2, what ended up becoming known as Pokémon Gold and Silver was first shown at the Space World show in Japan in 1997. With a prominent spread in the January 1998 issue of Nintendo Power magazine. It was due to delays, including a public apology from Nintendo citing developer burnout, that Gold and Silver ended up not releasing in Japan until November 21st of 1999. The first Western release took just under a year, with North America getting the games on October 15th of 2000 and Europe on April 6th of 2001. Because of the long localization time, I read FAQs about the game religiously in the run-up to the Western launch, including reading one in the internet room of a local children's hospital while recovering from surgery. A lot of my interest was mechanical. What would happen now that it wasn't just the Nidoran family who had genders? What could I do with breeding? What would the introduction of a visible special defense stat do to the game? And why was there a red Gyarados being talked about? Once the Western launch hit, I basically played Silver for the better part of 2.5 years. If I wasn't updating a guide for the games, which nearly got me a job in the industry during my freshman year at university, I was practicing for a world championship that never happened by simulating battles in an IRC channel. It was there that I began a grudge against one of the game's 100 new Pokémon, Blissey, that I still harbor to this day, for the simple fact that she made half of the game's attacks completely unusable in serious competition. But the more I played, the more cracks began to show in the game. Gold and Silver might have introduced 100 new Pokémon, but I wanted to use a lot of the new ones who, for some reason, were stuck in the game's final third, or in some cases, the last room of the final dungeon of the game. The programming genius of the late Satoru Iwata got about 2/3 of the Kanto region of the original games in there, and a final fight with Red. But there was a 15 to 20 level jump between Blue and Red when the highest leveled Pokemon I could fight were in the mid-40s. This also served to give the Johto region short shrift for almost a decade. A feature I grew to loathe, roaming legendaries, also made its debut with the legendary, let's call them gerbils, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. The TMs were crap, and I later learned you could win the game by default if you had 11,000 Pokégen by the time you got to Goldenrod City, which isn't that hard. And a few years later, I saw multiple people online find that the much-hyped real-time clock feature caused Gold and Silver to kill the internal save battery in about 5 years. To this day, I still don't think my Silver will work, and I'm too scared to find out. In 2001, Pokémon Crystal was released and became the only Pokémon game to be exclusive to the Game Boy Color. It brought some series firsts of its own: animated Pokémon sprites, a female trainer, a move tutor, and a battle tower. It also dropped the number of roaming gerbils by 1/3, blessedly, and made some Pokémon more readily accessible before Mount Silver. The entire second generation of Pokémon is now on the 3DS Virtual Console, so I don't have to worry about dead batteries, with Gold and Silver launching on September 22nd, 2017, and Crystal following on January 26th of 2018. But what most people look to now is the DS remakes, Heart Gold and Soul Silver. which released in Japan on September 12th of 2009, and the rest of the world the following March. Although the screwed leveling curve and odd Pokemon location choices mostly continued, the remakes flesh out both Johto and Kanto, including adding a Safari Zone and the cut areas of Viridian Forest and the Seafoam Islands. Also included in the remakes was the Pokewalker, which offered training and rare Pokemon, and whatever the hell the cutscene when you brought an event legendary in is. Pokemon Gold and Silver brought in a lot of changes to the core series, but there's just as much that didn't really work. Ask me on Twitter at NWRDonald, and I'll gladly explain how Gold and Silver is actually the most sexist game in the series, but a lot of that was due to the limitations of the Game Boy it was still tethered to, and when the series moved to the GBA, a lot of what it got right started in 1999.
Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire released on March 19, 2003, moving the series to the 32-bit Game Boy Advance and bringing with them improved visuals and a handful of interesting changes. 2005 saw the familiar third version, Pokémon Emerald, while remakes Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire arrived in 2014. While these water-dense entries were well received, for some they marked a sour note compared to the Gen 2 games. Taking place in the Hoenn region, Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire tasked players not only with becoming the Pokémon League champion and collecting all 202 regional Mons, but also with foiling the plans of either Team Magma or Team Aqua, who were attempting to use the power of legendary Pokémon Groudon or Kyogre to expand the amount of landmass or water respectively. Like in previous games, a Pokémon Professor, Birch in this case, gives you your Pokédex and your choice of starter, Trico, Mudkip, and Torchic, and so begins the latest journey from humble beginnings in Little Root Town. Ruby and Sapphire introduced some key gameplay features that have continued to appear in subsequent titles. First, Pokémon were given abilities that allowed them to absorb or evade certain attacks, summon certain weather conditions, or nullify status effects. Second, caught or bred Pokémon would be assigned a nature that would increase one stat and decrease another, depending on the specific nature. Third, double battles would see trainers using 2 Pokémon at a time during a fight, with certain attacks damaging or affecting multiple Pokémon at once. One other notable addition was Pokémon contests, where judges would rate a Pokémon in a particular category across multiple rounds, and this added a new wrinkle for players less interested in battling or scouring the region for new creatures. Pokémon Emerald may not have brought with it the major differences of Yellow and Crystal, but it did include a variety of minor differences that made it seem like a new Game Plus version of Ruby and Sapphire. For example, gym leaders had different Pokémon and could be rebattled. One post-game edition, the Battle Frontier, included the Battle Tower of Ruby and Sapphire, but also a number of extra areas where you could battle Pokémon and earn items. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire for Nintendo 3DS carried forward other gameplay changes from previous entries, like Pokémon X and Y, but given the advanced technology of the 3DS, it's not surprising that the story of these games is what gets a major overhaul. New characters and expanded roles for familiar ones can make the remakes worth experiencing, even if you've played any of the original games. Pokémon Sapphire was the one I chose in early 2003 as I approached the final months of my high school life. Many of the friends I had played with and against years earlier had moved on from Pokémon, and I was facing the reality that maybe I wasn't going to get the experience I wanted from these games anymore. I still had my brother to trade and battle with, but friends my own age were into different things now. Funny enough, I would soon after begin spending more and more time playing board games like Settlers of Catan and other video games with my brother's friends, who were always coming to our house after school. To this day, many of my good friends I met during this period, when neighborhood pals of my brother would stop by for gaming sessions, and so I found a new group with whom I can continue to enjoy Pokemon. This discovery of a new friend group is one thing I'll always connect with Pokémon Sapphire.
With Nintendo's latest handheld gaining popularity, it was only a matter of time until the next generation of Pokémon games would make their debut on the DS. In 2006, Pokémon Diamond and Pearl were released to start off Generation 4, followed 2 years later by Pokémon Platinum. Making the jump to the DS brought along with it a wealth of new potential thanks to the DS's superior hardware. Diamond and Pearl are best known for their incorporation of wireless connection to the series. Series staples such as trading and battling online and the global trade system originally made their debut here, and although simple in today's standards, were considered a massive leap forward for the time. No longer did you need to link cables or wireless adapters to play with your friends. Anyone and everyone could play together, no matter where they were in the world. The journey this time took place in the Sinnoh region, a new world with a focus on mountains and caves. You begin your journey in Twin Leaf Town before heading off on your adventure with your rival Barry to be the very best like no one ever was. Upon reaching the first route, you're introduced to the Sinnoh region's Pokémon professor, Professor Rowan, and his aide who takes the appearance of the other gender player character that wasn't chosen. You're given the option to pick between Turtwig, the tiny leaf Pokémon, Chimchar, the chimp Pokémon, or Piplup, the penguin Pokémon. The journey then follows the typical Pokémon series tropes. Beat all 8 gyms, defeat an evil team, and defeat the Elite Four. With Diamond and Pearl being the entry point for many Pokémon fans, the lack of deviation from the norm wasn't that big of a turnoff for people. Having a brand new adventure and Pokémon combined with the new wireless features was more than enough to make these games stand out at the time. The Pokémon this time around are some of the best Pokémon the series has seen yet. The gimmick with the Gen 4 Pokémon is that a lot of them are new evolutions or baby forms for older Pokémon. Underutilized Pokémon such as Roselia, Yanma, and Porygon 2 were all given new evolutions, while Pokémon like Mantine, Mr. Mime, and Snorlax all got new baby forms. Of course, fan favorites like Lucario were added while also providing the obligatory evolutions in Glaceon and Leafeon. Although new designs were overall less memorable, I'm looking at you, Cherubi and Cherim, the focus on reimagining older Pokémon allowed for new ways to use Pokémon you may not have used before. In terms of competitive play, arguably the biggest difference was the addition of the physical special split. Before Diamond and Pearl, Pokémon move types were either designated to being a physical move, utilizing a Pokémon's attack stat, or a special move, utilizing a Pokémon's special attack stat. For example, all Poison-type attacks were considered physical, whereas all Fire-type moves were considered special. This meant that Pokémon such as Blaziken, a fire fighting type with a high physical attack stat, could not use fire-type moves well. With Diamond and Pearl, however, every damaging move was divided into either a physical attack like Blaze Kick or a special attack like Flamethrower, to allow every Pokémon to utilize their type to the best of their ability. This completely changed the competitive scene, giving older Pokémon new ways to shine in ways they couldn't due to type limitations in the previous generations. This may sound like an inconsequential change to some, however in the competitive sphere, this change was revolutionary and one that is only looked back upon positively. To me, Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum all hold a special place in my heart. Diamond in particular was my first exposure to the series, and although I began my journey to become a Pokémon Master in Heart Gold, I still regard the games as some of the most influential in my gaming career. I remember watching my friend in awe as he fought the Elite Four single-handedly using his awesome Empoleon. Going back to these games today may be hard due to the sluggish combat and overuse of HMs, but they're still some of my favorite games in the series. I got to play Pokemon with friends hundreds of miles away during winter breaks, and the joy of seeing my team beating everyone else's teams was a joy that couldn't be replicated. Cynthia is still, to this day, one of my favorite video game characters, and her and the other characters' appearance in these games made the experience even more memorable. For all these reasons, Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum all holds a special place in my heart.
Hopes, dreams, discoveries, adventures await you and your Pokémon. Thus begins perhaps the most important Pokémon games since the originals, Pokémon Black and White. The 5th generation debuts our first region outside of Japan, Unova, based on New York City. With the change in locale came 156 new Pokémon and none of the originals. Some fans praised the evolution in tone and gameplay, while others saw the new decks as a betrayal of the series' roots. Still, Black and White are perhaps the perfect culmination of what came before and harbinger of what was to come. Black and White start quick. You choose a starter and take out your 2 best friends within seconds. Charon is a bookish stand-in for someone who's played a Pokemon game before, and Bianca is a cheerful but timid girl with friction at home. You're out on the field in minutes. While new Pokemon design philosophy has changed over the years, Game Freak did a great job designing foreign counterparts to standard Pokemon. Patrat may not be as iconic as Rattata, but it's definitely just a rat you'd find around New York. Years of experience gave Unova a strong, balanced selection of Pokémon, including unique typings like Dark Dragon, Ground Ghost, and Electric Bug. Unfamiliar Pokémon lurk on every route, and TMs now have infinite uses, so you're encouraged to change up your team often. No other Pokémon game has been able to recapture the joy of discovery for those who'd played a previous entry. Each town has a story, often with a gym leader and Team Plasma. Plasma might not be the most interesting evil team as they question if Pokémon battles are morally wrong. N, your main rival and king of Team Plasma, wants to become champion in order to free all Pokémon, but Team Plasma exploits N to recruit new members and take over the world. The entire narrative barrels toward an epic battle between good and good, each with a box legendary, fighting with wills more than with Pokémon. Then, you unlock a massive chunk of the map and join the International Police for a post-game takedown of the rest of Team Plasma. Black and White are the peak of Pokémon's original art style. Fully animated sprites dance in fast battles full of color. The camera pulls out for vistas as skyscrapers tower in the distance. Locales don't overstay their welcome but leave enough of an impact to be memorable, and the revolving seasons give a reason to revisit each area. Unova is packed with life and character in a way we haven't seen since. As the last generation with sprites, Gen 5 is the last one to truly feel like a little world in your pocket. The pair are technically magnificent but came out in North America 2 weeks before the 3DS. Still, they used every inch of the DSi's hardware. Trainers could video chat and send Pokémon into a dream world for browser games to meet rare Pokémon. They even had a local discovery feature similar to Street Pass. Black 2 and White 2 came out for the DS surprisingly far into the 3DS's life, and the sales reflect that. The only straight sequels in series history, you start in the beautiful state of New Jersey and make your way over to an updated Unova. This entirely different path sprinkled with new gyms gives Unova a fresh feel, and more than 100 earlier gen Pokémon make for tons of potential team variations. The story doesn't have the mystery of the original, nor does it promise to hold the secrets of humanity or whatever, but it does reward players of the original. Black 2 and White 2 add a bunch of neat things like achievements, rappel chaining, and hidden grottos. Your rival, Hugh, wants to get stronger so he can save a stolen Pokémon from Team Plasma. The Pokémon World Tournament features tons of returning gym leaders from other generations. This entry was definitely made for fans, and it's a shame so few have played it. I had just moved out of my parents' house when Black and White came out, and I was living with my two best friends. One by one, we each walked into our living room a bit embarrassed by our midnight purchase, but spent the next month sharing discoveries and completing the Pokédex. We thought we needed to be tough adults out in the world alone, but we realized we were still just kids and could rely on each other for help. Just like no one can complete the Pokédex by themselves, no one can get through life without friends.
The Pokémon franchise resisted making the jump to 3DS for a little bit, choosing to release Black 2 and White 2 on the original DS more than a year after the new system's launch. But by 2013, it was finally time for the Pokémon series to make the jump into the third dimension. X and Y marked a lot of firsts for the franchise. It obviously was the first time a mainline Pokémon title was rendered in full 3D. It was the first time a Pokémon game had a simultaneous worldwide release. It was the first time you could customize the look of your main character. The 6th generation of the franchise was a huge event, feeling almost like a soft reboot ushering the series into a new era. This time our Pokémon adventures would take us through Kalos, a region heavily inspired by real-world France. You start out as a new resident of Vanilleville Town, and you quickly get thrown into the action when you meet and befriend 4 local trainers, Shauna, Tierno, Trevor, and either Calum or Serena, depending on whether you're playing as a boy or a girl. These 4 serve as recurring characters throughout the adventure, and you'll face off against each of them once or twice by the game's end. I was always most interested in your main rival, Calum or Serena, and their arc through the game of feeling like they can't live up to your ability and they're always one step behind you. It felt like an inversion of the classic all-time rival Gary Oak, and it was a nice change of pace that gave depth to a role that's usually one-dimensional. A big change to the structure this time around was the expanded focus on internet connectivity via the player search system, better known as the PSS. The PSS took up the 3DS's bottom screen on the overworld and showed the status of online players around the world, both friends and strangers alike. The PSS was a quick, seamless way to keep up with what other players were doing or set up lobbies to battle or trade with friends. My favorite feature was the Wonder Trade, which would set up a trade between you and a random player somewhere in the world. The thrill of never knowing what I was going to get, as well as the fun of coming up with the dumbest nickname I could give the Pokémon I was sending out, managed to sustain entire hours of doing nothing but setting up and carrying out trades. The main event of X and Y's new features, though, was Mega Evolution. Much like Goku transforming into a Super Saiyan 3, Mega Evolution allowed Pokemon who were already in their strongest form to go even further beyond, temporarily growing into a more powerful form. Mega Evolution was a chance to make old Pokemon new again, with some really cool ideas like giving Blastoise a third tank-like cannon on its back, or extending Garchomp's claws into large scythes. Pokemon's types could even change, like with Pinsir gaining a flying type and Mewtwo gaining a fighting type. The best Mega Evolved form was undoubtedly Kangaskhan, who powered up simply by having its child leave its pouch and join the fight alongside its parent. This generation also saw the addition of the Fairy type, the first new type to have been added since Steel and Dark in Gen 2. This new elemental type was introduced to curb the increasing power of Dragon-type Pokemon, giving them, and Fighting-type Pokemon, a new counter to worry about. It also served the purpose of buffing the underpowered Steel and Poison types, giving them a new target to be a counter for. The Fairy type was retroactively applied to a number of old Pokemon to fill out the competitive pool, while also introducing plenty of new Pokemon, the most hilarious being Klefki, a Pokemon based off of a Ring of Keys. Truly a dragon's worst nightmare. Pokemon X and Y were a special generation of Pokemon to me, being the only Pokemon games released while I was living on campus at college. I got to see Pokemania take over my school in real time, as there was someone with a 3DS in hand playing the game pretty much everywhere I went for a solid month or two. The in-game PSS, showing the status of dozens of players along with an avatar representing their own personalized characters, went a long way in selling the feeling that for a short time, I'd become a part of a larger Pokemon world. I made new friends with people who would simply notice that I was playing the game in common areas, and the friends that I already had were engrossed with our shared adventures in Kalos for weeks. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, and now that I've moved on to an office job where I don't get to see a lot of people out in public as often, I doubt I'll ever see anything like it again. Gen 6 might not be the most polished or universally favored generation, but for these reasons it'll always be a special generation to me.
Generation 7 was officially announced on February 26, 2016, introducing players to the tropical Alola region. Pokémon Sun and Moon promised to completely shake up the Pokémon formula with its worldwide release in November that same year. In Sun and Moon, or Sumo as it is often called, the player is once again put into the seat of a young trainer who has moved to Alola from the Kanto region and is given the option between 3 starter Pokémon. This time around, your options consist of Litten, a fiery little kitten with attitude, Poplio, a seal with a clownish nature, and Rowlet, the handsomest boy at the ball. With starter in hand, the player is sent off to travel the 5 islands of Alola in order to complete the Island Challenge. Therein lies the biggest change Gen 7 brought to the table. Gyms are out, trials are in. Instead of each town having a gym where the player can challenge the gym leader, most towns in Alola feature a trial captain who has set up a unique challenge for passing trainers. These trials all differed entirely from each other, ranging from collecting ingredients for a stew to investigating an abandoned grocery store. Each trial ended by pitting the player against the area's totem Pokemon, a massive, powered-up version of a native Pokemon that functioned more like a traditional JRPG boss fight than anything the series had previously featured. Once all trials on a given island have been completed, the player has the ability to challenge the island's Kahuna, a particularly strong and more experienced trainer, in order to determine if they are ready to move on to the next island or not. Another big addition from Gen 7 was the introduction of Z-moves. For every step the player completes in the island challenge, whether it be winning a trial or defeating a Kahuna, they will be awarded a Z-crystal for that trial's particular type theme. Giving this crystal to a Pokemon will allow them to use one Z-move per battle, activated by performing a specific series of poses heavily inspired by Japanese tokusatsu shows. Some Pokemon would receive their own unique Z-moves, but others would simply receive souped-up versions of a move already on their list. This, alongside the previous generation's Mega Evolutions, added even more strategy to battling, as each ability can only be used once per battle and only if the Pokemon is holding the needed item. Of course, there were other changes to the game as well, such as finally ditching HMs and replacing them with ride Pokemon that could be summoned to serve the same purposes. The game also introduced players to the villainous Team Skull, who, in a refreshing change of pace, was not a super powerful crime syndicate or organization bent on changing or destroying the world, but instead just a bunch of bored teenagers trying to rebel and seem tough. Characters like Hau, Lily, Gladion, and ya boy Guzma captured the hearts of many a player, and the beautiful scenery of Alola, largely based on the islands of Hawaii, gave it a firm second place on my list of favorite regions. However, the games did get a large amount of flack from fans for their over-reliance on long and usually needless tutorials gumming up the first few hours, as well as replacing Gen 6's fantastic online interface with the confusing and over-designed Festival Plaza. Exactly 1 year later, in November of 2017, two enhanced versions of Sumo were released, titled Pokémon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. These versions were overall largely the same as their originals, with a few notable changes. A few totem Pokemon along the way were changed, new unique Z-moves were given to Pokemon who previously had none, and the story was tweaked in various ways, with things like the introduction of Dulce and Zaci of the Ultra Recon Squad. It also introduced new activities like Mantine surfing, giving even more Hawaii-style personality to the region. However, many of the significant changes to the games are only present in the back half, most notably a post-game story section pitting the player against Team Rainbow Rocket, a group made up of every previous generation's main villain. Upon Sumo's announcement, I found myself more excited for a Pokemon game than I'd been in ages, with both entries of the previous generation having largely been a bit disappointing for me. The idea of a region based in Hawaii, a place I had had the privilege of visiting just a few years prior, was especially interesting for me. I bought Moon day one and immediately fell in love with just about everything in Alola. The music especially left a large impact on me, and I still to this day think it's one of the best soundtracks the series has ever had. I understand the criticisms the game has received and honestly agree with most of them, but my adventures with my dashing owl son are ones that I'll remember for my whole life. Gen 2 may still have my heart on lockdown, but Gen 7 has sure somehow managed to come close.
We'll soon have the next generation Pokemon in our Switch-filled hands, and despite any controversy surrounding design decisions and leaked details, it's time to revisit those wonderful choices that make Pokemon games so special. With dozens of new creatures, a unique region, and a plethora of gameplay changes, Sword and Shield are poised to leave their mark on the fanbase and the series as a whole. Many new trainers will start their Pokemon journey with Generation 8. Many seasoned veterans will once again set and work towards their own Pokemon-related goals in the Galar region. However you've grown up with or encountered the Pokemon franchise, the release of a new mainline entry is an opportunity both to look forward to what's ahead and also to reflect on how far these games have come. If you have a 3DS, you have access to nearly every mainline game ever released, if you include remakes, so there's no excuse for not revisiting an old fave or jumping into Johto for the first time. Here's to hoping Pokemon games of the past make their way to Switch as well. In closing, I want to thank my collaborators Donald Terrio, Brett Posner-Ferdman, Adam Abunazar, Matt Zawodniak, and Joe DeVader for their contributions. Thanks to everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more Pokemon coverage, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more Pokemon content coming very soon, including a full review of Pokemon Sword and Shield.
This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.